I would like to begin my commentary today by thanking our organizers, all the people who are putting in so many hours of work to ensure that this open seminar is such a great success. And I'd also like to thank Professor Gradim for her excellent summarization of the key doctrines in Jean Poinsot's Semiotics. It is, as she expressed herself, a remarkably difficult task. The distinctions which John of St. Thomas makes are numerous, subtle, and often, in my estimation, presented in a manner that requires extremely careful thinking in order to grasp precisely. Among the many crucial doctrines of Poinsot, which Professor Gradim succinctly and accurately summarized, was the threefold distinction of signs into natural, stipulated, and customary, or the signum naturale, signum ad placitum, and signum ex consuetudine. While I will have occasion to speak at length on Poinsot later this year, I would like to take this opportunity to dwell for a few moments on the distinction between the stipulated, that is, the signum ad placitum, and the customary, the signum ex consuetudine, and to consider how both relate to the natural sign and to nature. And I'd add here at this point that my comments will not be very much in the line of explication, but aimed instead at stimulation. Before diving into the details, however, allow me to state why I think these distinctions are so important. Namely, that today, far too widespread is an often implicitly accepted dualism in our world. A dualism between what is natural and what is cultural. In general, our world has been divided by dualisms of a compounding nature since the time of René Descartes, building off that division of mind and world which he nakedly posited and which so many accepted after him, without even seeming to realize what it was they were doing. Though I'd also add that human beings in every era have seemingly been prone to adopting such discontinuous views of reality, views that segregate into separate and unrelated chunks of being the phenomena of our experience. Thus, we accept not only the dualism of nature and culture, but of matter and spirit, of the physical and the psychological, even of the supposedly rational held in opposition to the irrational. These are, in their own way, more fundamental than that division of nature and culture, and yet the tacit acceptance that these two are distinct spheres, that is, that there's a natural sphere and a cultural sphere, this tacit acceptance holds that the separation, or imbues through this separation, this view of discontinuity, which feeds back into the other dualisms, not only further occluding the more fundamental cynicism of the universe as a whole, but in a way which causes an ever more fragmented culture, increasingly irresoluble with the nature upon which it is founded. Now, the threefold distinction which Poinsot posits is a distinction that I would say concerns the ground. That is, it concerns the basis upon which a sign vehicle is capable of representing an object. Whatever it signifies does so naturally, on the basis, when there is a basis of a cognition-independent connection between the vehicle and the object. And thus, whatever is signifying naturally can render that signification, or that object signified, present to any mind capable of grasping the relation, of grasping what it is in the sign vehicle that serves as a ground of the relation to the object. By contrast, the conventional signs, the stipulation and custom, require an additional awareness in order that the object be signified. And it is for this reason that they are commonly called conventional signs, convenire, for each vehicle signifies together with something else, with a ground not strictly present in their own natural being, but which is dependent upon some relational elaboration. And I'll return to this notion of relationality in the conclusion of my comments here. But before this, we need to attend to the distinction of stipulated and customary. Now, what comes together with the signification of the stipulated sign vehicle is that explicit imposition of the will, imposed in a certain public way. An explicit imposition that this one thing, the vehicle, will be taken to signify the other, the object. Such a stipulation can be made only through language, such that even things which are not linguistic signifiers themselves are signifiers according to what Deely calls the post-linguistic. That is, if I posit a certain simple drawing or pattern of lines, such as this, to be a sign of sadness, this signification accrues to these lines, to this pattern, only within the context of a linguistic understanding. Absent my linguistic explanation of it, the stipulation would never attain the publicness which is integral to the stipulated sign. The ground upon which the vehicle relates to the object wouldn't be there. By contrast, the customary sign grows into being. It arises from patterns of use. Napkins are placed on the table because they are convenient when one is having a meal, and so one frequently makes use of a napkin while eating, and thus they come to signify the temporal proximity to a meal's occurrence. It is not in the napkin itself, precisely speaking, that this signification occurs, but according to a context of action for which the napkin is suitable, and to which action the napkin is frequently enough applied for those who dwell within this context, that the signification can accrue to it. Thus, one and the same object may attain a multitude of significations according to the diversity of uses and contexts in which it can be found. A rose might grow to signify a beautiful woman, or beautiful women in general, or beautiful people in general, or conciliation, or courting, or, in more specific contexts, even an individual person or a group of persons, insofar as they are fittingly juxtaposed somehow together. Now, this custom may burgeon into something beyond the merely customary use. It may, that is, give further rise to a stipulated sign. As Poinsot writes, if custom respects some sign by appointing and proposing it for a sign, such a sign founded on custom will be stipulated. But if custom does not propose or institute something as a sign, but expresses the simple use of the thing, by reason of that use the thing is taken for such a sign. Such a sign is reduced to a natural sign. Well, I think there's a lot to take note of in this passage, but two things in particular stand out to me. The first is that the customary sign expressing the use of a thing is reduced to the character of a natural sign. Thus, even non-human animals observe customary signs, as the dog, who is a pet, can be stimulated to expect food or a walk by the time of day or by other actions which you might take, which habitually anticipate these others. Now, this is not a mere simulation of natural signification, but rather it's a kind of unfolding of being through relations. It is an unfolding of signification not in the nature, we might say, of the sign vehicles, but in some way from their natures, inasmuch as it is fitting to the natures of all such things to accrue certain contexts of relations. Now, the second thing that stands out to me from the passage is that stipulation may be founded upon custom. We see this frequently with language itself. For instance, words gain slang meanings not by stipulation, but by custom. And then later, stipulation might accept and publicly declare the customary usage, entering it into authoritative works such as a dictionary. And curiously enough, that very often seems to remove the context in which the slang word is used, or to diminish it somehow. Conversely, and in a way correspondingly, one cannot remove, in fact, a customary sign by a dictatorial fiat. You cannot stipulate against custom, just as you cannot stipulate against nature. But whereas nature fundamentally, in the proper Aristotelian sense of what a nature is, whereas nature cannot be changed by our actions, custom, which is relationally constituted, can. Thus, one can remove the possibility of the pattern of customary action, and to the degree that one succeeds in doing so, so too the customary signification is diminished. To quote Poinsot again, a sign arising from custom does not perish from a mere suspension removing the institution, but from a suspension removing the multiplication of acts and frequency of use. Thus, because the representation of a customary sign is founded on the very multiplication of acts which constitutes a custom, when such multiplication is removed, the fundament of the sign is removed. And so the determination left as a consequence of the multiplication is destroyed by means of the opposite privation, just as the habit of a science is lost through being forgotten, especially because something positive always intervenes in a loss of memory or custom, insofar as objects succeed one another in a succession by which the earlier objects gradually slip from memory by disposing toward an opposite act or by impeding the memory itself, and custom from becoming rooted. Another remarkably rich passage on which we could dwell for quite some time. One thing that pops into my own mind at this very moment is that succession of objects, one after another, which pushes earlier objects out of our memory, which impedes the memory and custom from becoming rooted, seems to me to be profoundly problematic in our own digital age when we are bombarded constantly by new and different objects. Memory and custom have no opportunity, or very little opportunity, in the way in which many of us, unfortunately, live our lives today, to become rooted. Now, by way of conclusion, I'd like to draw attention to a few quick thoughts, which I hope will stimulate contemplation. The first is that customs, arising as they do from the contexts of things' usage which is always somehow according to their own natures, such customs are not necessarily fitting to human beings. We may put things to use in ways which are somehow befitting those things' natures, things that have potency, that is, innate potencies, to the ways in which we use them, but which are nevertheless unsuitable to the context of their employment as a whole, to contexts, we might say, which are unfitting for other natures, especially our own, and therefore uses which are relationally discordant. As a simple example, the kitchen knife is suited by nature to cut. To see it laid upon the counter and think of chopping vegetables for dinner is suitable, I think, in nearly any context. To see that knife and think instead of stabbing one's neighbor is not so suitable. That is, the knife, by its own nature, by its own properties, is suited to both actions. But relationally considered, one action is suitable as a whole, or to the whole context of action, and the other is not. Of course, there could be the context in which there's an invader in the home, come to kill you, or to take your things, or to otherwise violate justice, in which case the knife as a weapon may, in fact, be suitable. What I'm hinting at here, however, is a certain question. When we disconnect our customs from their natural bases too far, natural bases not just in what they are themselves or the things themselves, but the relational contexts by which they are actually encountered. When we disconnect these customs too far, too profoundly, too thoroughly from the natural, fitting, and resoluble whole, do these customs perhaps wilt and pass sooner or later out of their proper significations, out of their proper fitting beings as what they are themselves? The second point that I wish to draw attention to here is that all these signs are what they are, as Professor Gradim rightly discusses, relatione secundum esse. We lose the greater fabric of our signified reality by ignoring or denying the reality of such relations. Most especially do we lose the reality of culture, which, as it were, is a pattern of sign relations signified by patterns of sign relations. It is the world of things and persons embraced by language and suffused with a post-linguistic intelligibility, which linguistic and post-linguistic intelligibilities constituted only through sign relations. That these relations exist and that they exist in a certain measure distinctly, if not independently from their fundaments. Alone, this kind of relation can explain how stipulated significations can become customary ones, and how custom can give rise to stipulation without essentially changing what custom has established. So in sum, I would like to point out just how rich the insights of Jean Poinsot are for our own day, for our own situation, in which, as Deely rightly points out in a number of texts, that most of us don't deal with the natural world very directly. We live in and through and with and immersed in a world of culture, in a world of cultural artifacts, of cultural significations. And to really understand that, to really understand how it is that we are actually living today, I think these distinctions of Poinsot can be enormously helpful and enormously illuminative of our actual existence. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to any feedback that anyone might have.